Folks, thanks for joining in again today. I'm joining the growing number of people who are tuning in daily to Spotify and YouTube to catch my podcast here, Stockwell Day-to-Day News, and appreciate you doing that. We need the numbers to keep on growing. Thanks for the comments. Keep those coming. Also, some stunning stuff going on today that you don't want to miss. Let's jump right into it. The province of Alberta in Canada last night had its municipal elections, and just as an example, or just as maybe an encouragement to people here, whether you're in Canada or US, these elections for civic officials at the local level, municipal elections, city elections, are very important. More and more, we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years that candidates who are on the left, who don't have to identify as socialist, or in Canada, NDP, they win many of these elections, especially in areas which are very high concentrations of small c conservatives. For instance, the province of Alberta, of course, which votes very largely for conservative, and right through the province in most of the cities and in the towns. And yet what happens, and what we have seen happen, certainly in the major cities and some of the smaller ones, is you get elected severely left-leaning individuals who then run the city with socialist principles, so no concern whatsoever about debt, deficit, raising taxes on people, and introducing all kinds of programs which have nothing to do with providing safe and good services in a city. And so what has to be done, and we saw some successes on this last night. I was doing some media commentary in Alberta on this issue. What has to happen in cities is the people who are would be classified as centrist or even center-right, they need to get together and think about who can be the one who will run against the left-leaning, often left-leaning socialists. The reason this is important is because in most of these towns and cities, the majority of people are in fact small c conservatives, but they wind up getting ruled by big L leftists. And that happens because you'll usually get a number of well-meaning conservatives who want to run for mayor and want to do a good job and want to get rid of the socialist economic and other policies that are wrecking their cities. But when you have 4 or 5 candidates that are in the center or the center right and running against 1 or maybe 2 at the most candidates who are on the left, then that majority conservative vote gets split, and the person that runs up the middle to their glee is the leftist who brings in policies that are harmful to the economic growth of the citizens and to flourishing of the cities in general. So folks, get your act together on this. I was helping and encouraging on a number of these campaigns, advising a number of candidates. One of the things I said was, look, all the polling to the left and to the right shows that in our cities, safety, security are the 2 major issues. And we have cities, yes, even in conservative provinces like Alberta, that are overrun with homeless encampments, overrun with people who are causing fear and all kinds of misconduct on the streets of our cities. Many are drug addicted and they desperately need help. And I advised a couple of candidates. I said, listen, most of the people, if they go out at all to vote in a municipal election, and it's usually a very low turnout, so you'll get the union vote, which will go, unfortunately, traditionally to the leftist candidate, and the others split. So you've got to send a signal to the voters. Get more than 30% of the people out there. And in Alberta, many of them missed a great opportunity. The Premier of Alberta is introducing legislation to deal with what we call the compassionate installation, or the compassionate corralling, if you want to call that, gathering up of severe, violent, repeat offenders who are in desperate need of drug withdrawal, but they will not volunteer to go into that themselves. And so they're developing legislation that is compassionate, geared towards an involuntary drug rehabilitation for the very tiny percentage even of the homeless people who are causing most of the problems. So that legislation provincially is very popular. As a candidate for mayor, it wouldn't have hurt at all for a Conservative candidate to say, I will be supporting and will have municipal policies that will support the legislation being developed by the province and Premier Danielle Smith relative to the compassionate, involuntary care of severe drug offenders who are causing problems. I don't know if any of this, I know some of the ones who could have won, some of the Conservative candidates were afraid to say that. Folks, as a small C Conservative, you can't live in fear of mainstream media. Of course, mainstream media doesn't understand the bedrock time-tested principles that go into Conservative policies, so they will always try and make a Conservative look negative. But people are listening, people are watching, and this is also, that's why it's so important to articulate your positions. This is very clear and important at the school board level, because you have in these cases, and right throughout the province of Alberta, school systems, or most of the kids, not all, most of the kids are coming from small C Conservative families. And what happens is, to the shock and horror, really, of the families, their kids face the imposition without any input at all of the gender policies, for instance. We all respect the right of adults. We respect the right of adults to, in whatever way they want to change or alter their physical being, but kids need to be protected from that. And the majority, this is an 80-20 issue, the majority of people, of citizens, the majority of people who send their kids to school want the girls' washrooms seen as protected places. They want to see kids protected, but they're terrified to raise their voices on this because the media just unleashes the most horrific attack on people who want these common sense policies. But what you have to do if you're running for school board, and with the other issues that you're going to be addressing, like curriculum and like costs, you have to say that you support the policies of, in this case, the Premier of Alberta and its government, Danielle Smith, which says that the alteration of children, either surgically or chemically, will not happen in our school systems. And parents are in the driver's seat there. You have to be willing to say those things if you're going to be running as a candidate. You will get elected. Those parents who are terrified to speak up in the quiet of the voting booth, they will put that X mark beside your name. So something to think about at these municipal and school board elections. Security continues to be an issue, as border security and Canada security, and there's a growing feeling, especially among the federal Liberals, that we should move away from our security arrangements with the United States and look to making security and defense arrangements with other countries. Folks, I don't think there's a country in the world that would not dearly love to be joined at the hip, as we are, with the strongest military power in the world, and also a democracy, which is the United States. And this is not a time to be pulling away from security agreements, but in fact, a time to be drawing closer in terms of sharing our intelligence capabilities and our resources. There are not enough men and women in all of Canada, though we have tremendous military and the bravest and most talented troops anywhere in the world. There's just not enough of us to line the borders and protect against a massive attack if it ever happened. But we do have the capabilities to join as strongly as we can on security arrangements with the U.S., to also be using and sharing our technological skills, which are very advanced throughout the world, in terms of continuing the research on a continental dome that would protect against missile attacks, because that is the attack of the future. So folks, not a time that we should be pulling away from the U.S. At one time, we had something called the DEW line in Canada, meaning way up north in the Arctic, where we collaborated with early warning systems. We need to be looking at that, drawing closer and sharing our intelligence and our technology and our tremendous troops in ways that really make sense. On the issue of security to a degree, there's I find it hilarious, our national TV networks, the CBC in Canada and the CTV news to global news I'm watching with interest and kind of chuckling. They're horrified at the so-called renovations that are being made at the White House on the East Wing. The East Wing, by the way, is not the historical wing of the White House. That's why the famous show was called The West Wing. I've visited the White House on a number of occasions, visited the presidents there, and look, it's a beautiful building. And to see our media going crazy because it's being renovated to the East Wing is to incorporate a ballroom where thousands of people will be able to attend and hold functions. All of the renovations, of course, are being paid for by the private sector. But guess what? It's that Trump derangement system thing. Even if Trump came up with the cure for cancer, people would somehow hate it and they wouldn't take the cure. But I'm not defending Trump here. What I'm saying here is it's amazing to see our media. I've searched some of the archives, very little concern, no concern when FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was president, and he tore the East Wing apart and even added a second layer to it. There was very little concern from Canadian media when President Nixon was in office, and he tore the insides out of the place to put in a bowling alley, of all things. Or when Barack Obama spent quite a bit of money, again from the private sector, to install the basketball court. Now, most of that is exterior, but it's still significant renovations. So virtually zero from Canadian media where that was happening. But now that they're going to put a ballroom in and also facilities for kids to come and play, wow, that's a bad thing. And what's sort of ironic, a lot of people won't know this, but just as a reminder, in 1814, we were pretty ticked off at the Americans, and a bunch from what was to become Canada headed across the border, and we burned the White House down. Canada burned down the White House in 1814, and now CBC and its acolytes are in shock and horror that it's being renovated. Kind of funny to watch that happen. I was saying for the last couple of days that with China slowing down, if not blocking the export of rare earth minerals, that's going to significantly impact our defense capabilities and many of the development of precious metals and alloys that are needed for semiconductors and in the cyber industries. Check out my podcast of yesterday. I go into great detail on this in terms of how that is going to significantly hurt countries like Canada, like the US. And I said, you watch, there will be an outreach, if there's any positive of this, to other countries from places like the United States. And sure enough, there we see President Trump today. He's in Australia and he's striking deals for their rare earth materials. Why doesn't he come to Canada and look at our rare earth materials, of which we have a significant abundance that can be of tremendous use, both on the defense side and the technology side? No, because we have our silly little posture of being elbows up. Look, I don't like the tariffs and we should oppose them all the way. But this business we've been engaged in lately of, as they say, cutting off our nose to spite our face, we have products which the Americans would benefit from and which we would benefit from not only selling but producing. But we are the ones saying, no, we don't want to have anything to do with them. And so we just wind up hurting ourselves. I hope we smarten up in that regard. On the fact of Trump going to Australia, take a look at what's happening around the world. There is much to the shock and horror of mainstream media internationally, culturally Marxist media. More and more countries continue to elect governments which are center-right. And they're throwing out, in many cases, not all, but throwing out the socialists that are destroying their country. Bolivia just had an election. And they finally, after years of Morales as the president there, who has just destroyed that country with socialistic policies, now have a conservative center-right government. Of course, Argentina has for a while now with Javier Milei. And we've seen just recently, I commented on this last week, and media were reluctant to pick it up. But I said media will continue to ignore the fact that in Japan, a woman being elected, a woman president prime minister in Japan, Sanai Takachi. And why are the media ignoring her? Because horror of horrors, to mainstream media, she is significantly small c conservative, both in social policy and economic policy, and she is being ignored. She can't be ignored much longer. I understand she's going to be making a trip to the U.S. So interesting to see the global shift. As we look, close out a note on the culture side, well, what can be more cultural, of course, than baseball and the fact that the Toronto Blue Jays won against Seattle. And in Canada, it's gone far beyond just a great sport and a great game, because we've got this huge hatred on for the Americans, and our elbows are up. But isn't it a little bit humorous? And by the way, I was cheering for the Blue Jays, and I'll be cheering for them in the next series, in the finals. But you know what? I'm not going to lose my mind in terms of saying this is some great nationalistic effort, because except for one player, the entire roster of the Blue Jays are Americans. And you know what? The Americans aren't much better on this. We saw in the Boston series, they were booing Toronto. Because of this anti-Canada and then anti-US feeling. So we've got a case right now, culturally, this is very interesting, where the Canadians are wildly cheering on their team of American multimillionaires, and the Americans are booing, when it comes to Toronto, our team of, guess what, American multimillionaires. You know what? They're all athletes. I don't care how much they make. I like a good game, but let's just calm it down a bit in terms of the cultural divide here. And I'll close out today by saying, go Jays, go. Thanks for tuning in.